So we actually, one of our topics was to talk about pair bonding, and we were kind of going to skip over, but maybe we can include it in some of this. And the reason I'm asking is the spring goose season's having an effect is because the pair bonding when two ducks mate up doesn't happen in Canada. That actually happens here. Mm-hmm. And Paul, won't you talk a little bit about, what time of the year does, I guess as a hunter, we always think everything happens north of the border, but that whole process starts here. And so is a duck that's mated up, and you talked about even the telemetry stuff you're doing that kind of breaks that pair bond for intermittent, and they got to regroup. Is some of this spring hunting pressure, could that possibly have an effect on ducks going back north?
We're getting pretty far out there on the science, end of things there. I mean, that's very poorly understood. Obviously, there's a lot of species variation. Pintails and mallards are pairing really early. There's paired birds in November and December down here already. Mm. Obviously, the later that occurs, the more destructive it could be, for those birds having to pair again. But certainly as those birds are on their north migration, if they're getting disturbed by conservation over hunts in South Dakota, absolutely.
There have been a couple of studies, I believe, in the rainwater basin in Nebraska and other locations, including some in North Missouri, where the initial days of the conservation order, some refuges were opened up for hunting, and then ducks were monitored to see how they responded if they were negatively impacted from using the habitat, not from them getting killed or having other impacts. And there certainly is evidence that continual hunting pressure, especially in former refuge areas or areas that had been kind of off limits, does have a negative effect on the duck use of those areas in the spring. As far as it actually having an impact on pair bonds that have been formed or about to be formed for gadwalls, that sort of stuff, we don't have that. But as far as some of the other effects of the spring hunting on use of habitats, yes, there is some data showing negative effects. The whole issue of disturbance and pressure, as Larry had talked about, kind of our belief has always been with hunting regulations that our ultimate objective was to reduce harvest. And we danced around this whole business that it's more than biological because we've got the human dimensions, the social aspects, we've got hunter satisfaction, we've got all of these sort of things. We'll talk a little bit later about our understanding of harvest effects on specific age groups, sex groups, species groups, and that sort of thing. But this hunting season business is more than just whether the duck gets killed because of these impacts that we've just talked about. I found it really fascinating, your comment about your white-fronted goose in Louisiana that responded within however many hours of the hunting season opening. And this whole business of discussion this past year in particular about what was causing the birds potentially to not go certain places, the belief, at least perception, or they didn't stay as long, or they all stayed north, or then you blame it on this, or you blame it on that, or whatever. And hunting pressure is part of that equation. As you had said, there's multiple factors. So it's not just that the hunting season caused a dead duck, but it also has tremendous impacts on where the bird goes, how long it stays, what body condition it ends up being in, ultimately then its potential reproductive success, and those component parts of population dynamics. And we have a little data on that. We actually do have some biology, some hardcore science on that. For example, there have been several studies that have looked at disturbance, not necessarily just related to hunting, but also vehicle traffic and bird watchers and other sort of entry into refuge areas and the like, about how long it took the birds before they got bothered enough to leave, what sort of bothering them caused them not to come back, if they did come back, how long it took them to come back, and when did they come back at all. We at the University of Missouri, up in my home territory, we had a couple of graduate students in an experimental study, a graduate student over a couple of years, and we used all kinds of different sort of disturbance, including shooting. It wasn't replicated hunting situation. We drove around in the truck, we drove around in the tractor, we walked around on foot, drove an ATV around, whistled, sang, shot, whatever, and monitored what the birds did. And I think we can all understand this, that the pressure, that sort of disturbance, is most intensified when there's other pressure going on. So in other words, if you walked around the unit before the duck season started, or after the duck season was over, a couple of weeks after the season was over, the birds didn't have the same response. They probably weren't as affected as much. You do the same thing during the hunting season, and boy, the antennas come up. And they respond a lot quicker and more severely. And everybody always says, well, gee, if the season was only 1 week later, look at all these ducks, man, the week after duck season, ducks are scattered all over creation. If the season was only 1 week later, you idiots, why didn't you set the season a week later? It's like, not heads. If you close the season in the middle of November, the week after there'd be ducks scattered over. If you close it in the middle of December, the week after they'll be all over. If you close it in the middle of January, they'll be all over. If you close it in the middle of February, a week later. So the birds are responding so quickly to this disturbance. And the sound of a gun and potentially dying, think about it. That's this bird's world. This is literally life and death. And so it's no wonder that they respond, and they respond quite quickly. It's also one of the reasons that refuges are so critical. I know a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, some people don't like refuges, and they say, well, if you didn't have these damn refuges, the birds would all scatter out and we'd all kill ducks. If you didn't have the refuge, like your white-fronted goose, that bird's gone. And we have hard data to show that the greatest hunting success is in areas within some sort of reasonable foraging distance, travel distance, hate to call it a home range or whatever, around some core key refuge areas. So we've got a lot of science behind the value of refuges. Refuges are one of our greatest tools in waterfowl conservation because it helps enable birds to access resources in places that otherwise they might not be able to do the same sort of thing. So back to this study, it was really interesting that a tractor, honestly a slow tractor moving around, not a lot of noise, didn't really bother the ducks. She's a farmer, you probably know that. Well, look at a coyote out in the field, and you're farming in the spring. Yeah. A coyote's out there and he sits down and watches you. He kind of like, oh, that's kind of interesting, this big giant thing with rubber tires rolling around. He might chase a rabbit out, maybe it'll actually be a good thing. But then you all of a sudden, come out there with a motorcycle and that coyote, man, he's gone.
Right.
Well, the duck's kind of the same sort of thing. Actually, a person on foot is one of the worst things.
Yes.
Because they do not associate that as normal at all. That is a bad thing in a duck's mind, especially if he's been shot at once before or he's had an exposure. And so that's going to eventually get me into talking about the difference between young birds and old birds. An old bird didn't get to be an old bird by being stupid. And the old bird figured out a place, a pattern, a set of foods, whatever that enabled him to survive, and then just make a decision whether he's coming back there next year, my buffet example earlier in this meeting, or not. So back to the point, that pressure and that disturbance, use the word disturbance, that pressure for me. The disturbance type, the amount, and the timing of it makes a world of difference in whether a bird will decide to stay, how long it leaves, and if it even comes back at all. A study in Colorado was done on this even not that awful long ago, published in the Journal of Wildlife Management. But several different studies. Been studies done on canvasbacks on the Mississippi River with boating pressure. There's been all kinds of interesting things. Leave it to say that if you're a hunter and you have a spot that you have some control over, your best friend is a refuge, and your best friend is little disturbance. Your best friend is to get in and out if you can. And also to not bother them, especially in the foraging areas that are causing them to be there. So we've got some real hard science that shows the importance of it. And now we've got telemetry data, and we've got other information, data from mallards in Mississippi a few years ago, Bobby Cox's stuff from Louisiana with pintails, work done in the Katy Prairie in Texas on geese, work done in Missouri on mallards, in the Illinois River Valley on mallards, Nebraska on mallards, Minnesota on mallards, I can go on and on. The data are very clear that the birds are making decisions about where to go and how long to stay, in part because of food, in part because of cover, in part because of water, but also in part because of disturbance and pressure And in some cases, pressure and disturbance trumps food. You can have a world of food, as you know, on your property.
Right. The food doesn't mean you're gonna have ducks. I mean,
That doesn't mean you're gonna have
Right.
ducks, because if they're bothered every day, they're gonna say, hell with this place.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna go someplace else. I'll wait till after the season and then I'll come back.
Right.
So it's real, and it's a major factor, a big factor. And some of the distribution things that we perhaps even saw last year, maybe it's not just what happened last year, Jim, but it's a cumulative effect. Again, remember this adult that maybe now has seen 4 or 5 years, if it's lucky enough to still be alive that long, it's probably seen every sort of decoy, every sort of call.
It works together with the decoys and the calls and everybody getting better at it. It's all ties together.
You bet. And so it's looking for any little thing that might be wrong. And then if it finds a spot that it's not being bothered, then it's probably likely to hang out there for a while. So ergo, you know, say a mallard flies from North Dakota into North Missouri. I'll pick on Missouri here for a minute because I'm a resident of the state. Flies to North Missouri, and it finds a refuge and it's got something decent to eat, whether it's moist soil or corn or acorns or whatever, and then all of a sudden our season ends. And it's still kind of warm, and like Larry said, he doesn't have a predisposition that somebody's punching his time clock, he's got to fly to Louisiana. Why is he going to go to Louisiana? Why is it even going to go to Arkansas? You know, why is it going to go any farther than it is? And chances are that he may not. Because he's learned the year before, he went to Arkansas, and there was some Arkie down there with you know, a blind sticking out of a rice field, and he kind of got hurting in the butt after his visit, you know, down there. So it's real. I didn't mean to make light of it. But the pressure and disturbance is real, and it is a major factor in the distribution. And you honestly think about a lot of our habitat management, we're really trying to affect distribution. We're trying to attract birds. We're honestly trying to keep them. You know, especially if you're a hunting club,
Right.
you want them hanging around a bit. And from population management, we're trying to protect their survival probability and also to increase their reproductive probability to maintain a population dynamics or condition that we're after. So wandering around the point, the bottom line is extremely important.